you do with just 4%?
Well, most people might lose hope, give up, and even withdraw.
You might believe that the odds are just stacked against you, so you don't do anything at all.
Or, like our guest today, who believe that 4% is worth the fight.
You scrape, you claw, and you believe that you can rise against the odds.
I'm Cory.
And I'm Tymme.
I moved out to California from the East Coast.
I came to LA from Hawaii.
The goal was to be a star.
So I ended up in Hollywood.
For 15 years, I warmed up crowds on American Idol, Dancing with the Stars, and even spent the last decade touring the world as a DJ.
I started as a dancer and performed for artists like Aaliyah, Missy Elliott, and Will Smith. I then authored 3 books and became a pastor.
But through it all, something was missing.
I felt this desire to be a part of something real.
A movement that would change communities.
It tells stories of strength built on people's passions.
Driven by their courage and giving the world hope.
So we've come together to celebrate unsung heroes from around the world. This is The Rise Effect.
On this episode of The Rise Effect, we're going to introduce you to Aaron and Shirell Coleman. Both have successful careers in the entertainment industry. From stage to screen, the Colemans have entertained audiences all over the world.
With a loving marriage, a strong family, and a life focused on serving others, who would have thought they would be facing the fight of their lives?
So it's March 2020. The whole entire world is flipped upside down. People's lives were rocked, none more than our guests on this week's show, Aaron and Shirell Coleman.
Take us back. I mean, we're almost at the 3-year anniversary, right? We just passed it. Aaron, why don't you start with that? What happened on that day in March of 2020?
Absolutely. So on March 28th, Shirell was taking me to the hospital. I was having stabbing headaches. And when she took me, they checked me, but at that time, because it was the beginning of COVID, there was a checklist. And if you didn't have everything on the checklist, you didn't have COVID. But Shirell was gonna get checked because she was having a little breathing problems. We were thinking it was allergies. So they wound up sending me home and they admitted her. So I had some stuff to do acting-wise that day, so I did my little things. Was finishing off a graphic design project. I spoke to Shirell all throughout the day, and she was doing okay. So then I said, well, I'm really tired. I was starting to feel weak, so I said, I'm gonna go to bed. And so as I was getting the bed ready, all of a sudden, and I know that this was the Holy Spirit because I don't phrase my words this way, but I heard, if you lay down to go to sleep, you will not wake up.
Wow. Okay.
So I said, okay. So I picked up the phone and I called telehealth. And immediately the nurse practitioner, Jane Ukandu, said to me, I want you to go to the hospital. I gave her the whole story, told her how I was feeling. I said, but I don't have the checklist. She said, you need to get to the hospital. I'm calling an ambulance. I said, well, will the ambulance take me to where Shirell is? She said, no guarantees, because by this point, the pandemic was really kicking in. So they said, they're gonna take you wherever they can get you in. I said, nope, I'm gonna drive myself. I'll get myself there. She said, okay, I'm gonna call triage so that they'll accept you, because some people were getting turned away because they were overrun. Triage then checked me, and within minutes I was admitted. They swabbed me for a COVID test. They said, we're also gonna give your wife a COVID test. And maybe about, I don't know how long, because I dozed off. When I woke up, they said, you have full-blown COVID, and so does your wife. And I said, okay. They said, your breathing is getting really bad. It's not working. We're gonna put you into an oxygen room. We moved your wife into an oxygen room. So by this point, all we could do was text each other to check in with each other. She had gotten some prayers from her Pastor Mauricio, so I was playing it on my phone while I was laying there. And then, you know, that's where things started to really shift and change.
The oxygen room wasn't enough. Both Aaron and Shirell needed to be intubated.
And then all of a sudden, there's a knock at my window, right? I had this giant bay window, and I look, and it was a chaplain. And he's pointing for me to pick up the phone. My first thought, something happened to Shirell. So I reached out, I'm getting weaker, but I picked the phone up, I'm like, what happened? Is my wife okay? What's going on? He said, no. He said, she's okay, she's on the ventilator, and they're about to put you on the ventilator. He said, and we need next of kin. And I'm like, why?
More words you don't want to
Right.
hear.
And I'm like, why?
Wow.
And then he broke it down to me in layman's terms. So basically, he said, you're going to be put into a medically induced coma and on life support. So the machine is going to be keeping you alive. And we need next of kin to make the hard decisions in case things go south, because both of you are very, very sick and it's not looking good. So I'm laying there and I'm like, okay. So I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to pray. All I did was I immediately texted Shirell's sister Ava in Detroit, my nephew Nicholas in New York, and Molly Rodriguez, who I said could be boots on the ground here for them. I sent that to the chaplain, and then they put me under, and everything went black.
It's crazy how one simple decision can determine whether or not you live or die.
We found out years later that during this time when I was intubated, we were both intubated, and I was out. The hospital called Ava, my sister-in-law, who I said can make all of the decisions for us, and said that Shirell, she only has 4% lung usage, and we don't think she's going to make it, and we're going to pull the plug. And so I'm out. I don't know anything that's going on.
Yeah.
So Ava said, and this is why it's so important, who you choose to make decisions for
My
you.
sister's tough.
She said, from Detroit, she said, God could work with 4%. Don't you take my sister off that ventilator. If you don't know what to do, go read a medical book. She said, in fact, I want you to pray. If you don't, Ava. She said, if you don't know how to pray, then get somebody in there that can pray. In fact, I don't want anybody in my sister's room that can't pray. Because if my brother-in-law wakes up and his wife is gone, he's not going to make it.
Right.
And she was right.
Never underestimate the power of prayer and the support of others.
When I woke up, I just woke up, and then I thought I was only out for like 4 hours. It was a week had passed by. And the nurse was looking over me in a hazmat suit. She looked like an angel. And she asked me some questions. I got them all wrong. I said, but how's my wife? And she said, she's resting, she's okay. I said, okay, good. Then I went back to sleep. Then then another day passed that I was still out, all right? And then I woke up again, and there was a nurse in the room. She said, oh, Mr. Coleman, you're awake. We've been praying for you. I'll go get the doctor. And she went and got the doctor, and he came in, and he was telling me about Shirell. And he said that she had some challenges. He says, kind of been a little bit up and down for her. He says, but we're doing everything that we can. I said, okay.
Shirell's still on the ventilator. Is she still out? So you're not able to text? How do you see her? Like, I can't imagine knowing, like, she could be on the other side of this wall and I can't see my wife.
Well, you know, here's a huge blessing. I did get to see her once. Okay, I'm in my bed. I couldn't move. And a nurse came in and said, well, your wife is doing better today. We're going to move her to another room, but we have to pass your room. Nurse did not have to do this. She said, we're going to roll her bed past your room. Would you like to see her? They said, we can't stop. We can't bring her in. It'll just be for a few seconds, but do you want to see her? I said, yes.
Yeah, that's magic.
So they turned, these two little tiny nurses turned my bed towards the door. They opened my door as wide as it would go, and then they wheeled Shirell and stopped her right in front of my door. And I saw her head was turned, she was completely sedated and out, but I called to her. I remember I was crying profusely, praying, say everything's gonna be all right, but it gave me such a sense of, it mitigated my fear. I got to see her, even if it was just for a few moments. I got to see my wife. I hadn't seen her in weeks prior to this.
All you're doing is imagining what's taking place, and now you get to actually see her physically. It must have drawn some hope, level of hope that you didn't have before.
Yes, it gave me inspiration that, okay, she's here. It's not just what I'm hearing from somebody. I got to see her for a few moments with my own eyes. And then the nurses they said, we have to move her. And they wheeled her away and closed my door and put my bed back. And I was just wailing in that bed, but it gave me such a sense of peace. And I said, okay, that was the moment where I said, okay, God woke me up first. I got to get better for my wife.
Even though Aaron was awake, his fight was really just beginning.
I was in the hospital for 3 weeks altogether. So we're coming now to the end of the 3rd week. And they said, we need to discharge you,
Yeah.
but no rehabilitation facilities would take me. They said, if you ever had COVID, they wouldn't take you because of the pandemic. They said, we have nowhere to send you, but you can't stay. And I pleaded, please let me stay, because my hope was we would both go home together.
Yeah.
But they said, no, you can't stay. So Molly said, well, I'll look in on you every day. So Molly did that. She would come in the morning, and she would check on me. She arranged the food, and she was doing prayer calls every day, 7 days a week, 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. prayer calls for Shirell and I. And our family was doing a family conference prayer call every day. So there was 3 prayer calls going on every single day.
Okay.
It was the hardest thing in the world to have to go through. But I said, I got to do it for my wife.
Can't imagine.
I have to be strong for her. And so things were going well, but then the doctor called and said, she's been on the ventilator for a month now, and she's a singer, right? I said, yes. She's an amazing singer. And they said, well, do you think she still wants to sing? I'm like, of course. They said, then we can't keep her on the ventilator any longer because it's going to cause irreparable damage. She will never sing again. I said, so what are the options? They said, we have to give her a tracheostomy, which is basically they have to cut a hole in her throat and put a tube in.
Right.
And then the tube is connected to an oxygen machine, and she'll get oxygen through the tube. So they said that's the only recourse. So I said, okay. Now I'm still using a walker, but they said we're going to do that, and we're going to have to surgically insert a GI tube into her stomach to feed her. And I said, okay. And they were going to put what they call a PICC line, where they have to insert that into one of the major arteries because all of her veins were collapsing in her arms from drawing blood. So the PICC lines where they put it in here and then they could draw blood as they need. So it was 3 surgical procedures that they had to do. So there was no other recourse. We had to do it. So what Molly did is she brought me back to the parking lot the day of her surgeries. And I couldn't go in because of COVID, you can't visit. But at least I was as close as I could be to her in the parking lot. And I remember I got my little walker, Molly put a chair out for me, and I just prayed. And to God be the glory, the surgeries went seamlessly, and Shirell was doing well.
From a ventilator to a tracheostomy to a GI tube, even a PICC line, and Shirell still wasn't out of the woods.
At 3 in the morning, I received a call that she had stopped breathing because she had a mucus plug. I was terrified. All these thoughts were running through my head. One of the doctors, Dr. Abdu, called me, and he said, I just want you to know, your wife is fighting. She's fighting to get back to you. He said, so don't you give up. I said, I'm not giving up. He said, I just want to make sure you know, do not give up. She's fighting to get back to you, and she's a fighter.
To hear the story of Shirell's incredible fight and how she rose against the odds,
Be sure to join us next week for part 2 right here on The Rise Effect.